Welcome to Tracing Immigrant Origins. We'll be discussing some of the steps you can take to learn more about your immigrant ancestors. We'll be looking at these 6 specific steps to learn more about your immigrant ancestor. We'll be looking at family sources, previous research, U.S. records, immigration and emigration records, naturalization records, and relatives and neighbors, or what we call the FAN principle. F-A-N stands for friends or family, associates, and neighbors. The first one we're going to look at is searching family sources. Genealogy is all about family, so take advantage of the opportunities you have to discuss your family and their traditions with other family members. Remember to gather personal and biographical information. Ask open-ended questions to encourage the people you're talking to really share what they know about the family. Record these interviews whenever possible. Look for family keepsakes. Treasures such as photos, Bibles, diaries, journals, and newspaper clippings can greatly add to your understanding of the family and its history. Be on the lookout for documents like birth, marriage, and death certificates, wills, deeds, and immigration naturalization documents. Take advantage of prior research such as online family trees, paying particular attention to the sources and records supporting the information provided on the tree. Published resources such as family histories, biographies, and county histories can also help us locate key documents. Check out online or digitized editions of books found on websites such as archive.org, Google Books, FamilySearch.org, and state and county websites like Missouri's Missouri Digital Heritage. Periodicals published by genealogical and historical organizations can be an invaluable resource. For more local records, don't overlook the online and on-site collections at libraries and genealogical or historical societies in the locations where your immigrant ancestor lived. Genealogical research works most effectively from the present back to the past. Working backwards through time affords us the best chance of identifying our ancestors' hometowns. Essential information for locating our ancestors' pre-immigration records. Many countries, especially European countries, do not have a central location for their records. Records are usually found at the county or town level. So you need to do everything possible with available U.S. records to focus your search on a specific location in the country from which your immigrant ancestor immigrated. Census records are very helpful in tracing immigrant origins. While the U.S. federal census, which dates back to 1790, is the best known, many states and territories also ran their own censuses. The data collected in each census is unique to that census, but information like that shown here on this slide was often collected and recorded by census enumerators, especially after 1850 when the U.S. federal census first recorded information for everyone living in the household instead of just the head of house. This chart illustrates the immigration-related information found in each U.S. federal census from 1850 to 1950. The 1940 and 1950 U.S. federal censuses also included a statistical survey of only 5% of those enumerated. Questions asked about language spoken and parents' birthplaces, shown with an asterisk on this chart, were only asked of those who were included in this survey set. The 1920 U.S. federal census was the only U.S. federal census to ask respondents to provide their actual year of naturalization, hence the red X on this chart. Make it a goal to follow your immigrant ancestor from census to census throughout their life in the U.S. Note your ancestors' birthplace and their parents' birthplaces when provided. This information may be more detailed in some censuses than others. For example, one census may list a person's place of birth as Germany, another may list it as Bavaria. Use the language spoken column information to focus your research on specific regions within larger countries. such as the once vast Austrian Empire. Dates of immigration and/or years in the U.S. were recorded on the U.S. federal censuses from 1890 to 1930. Use these dates as a starting point when looking for your ancestors' names on passenger lists. Be prepared to accept minor inconsistencies in recorded dates of immigration, especially if this information was collected many years after the immigrant entered the U.S. These dates give you a good place to start your research. We'll return to immigration and naturalization later on in this class. Do note, though, in this example, this is a different John Schaefer family than the one used in a previous example. Both are from Darmstadt, both were born in 1830, and both married women named Catherine. Both have a son named John, born in 1858, but this John is from Philadelphia, while the earlier John was from New York. Military records include draft and registration records, service records, and post-service records. All men living in the U.S. were required to register for the draft for both the World War I and World War II. World War II draft registrations asked for the exact place of birth. Some World War I registrations, like the one shown here, also asked for the exact date of birth. World War I draft was done in 3 registrations. The second registration, the 5th of June 1918, was for men born between the 6th of June 1896 and the 5th of June 1897, and requested the father's place of birth. Military draft records include those who served and those who were drafted but never called to service. Men and women who enlisted or were already in the service at the time of the draft will not have draft records. Service records can include name, residence, birth information, physical description, and discharge dates. Post-service records can include discharge papers and veterans' benefits. The web address for NARA's genealogy in military records and other websites mentioned in this class are listed on a slide near the end of this presentation. Newspaper articles and obituaries can also be an excellent source of information for immigrant ancestors. Check for clues such as employer and membership in a fraternal organization, obituaries of the immigrant's spouse and children. Search all local newspapers, including papers published for specific populations like ethnic, religious, and trade papers. Chronicling America at chroniclingamerica.loc.gov has free access to searchable newspapers back to 1777, and it provides an option for searching by ethnicity. Contact the local library in the community where your ancestor lived to learn more about their newspaper collection. Other types of records to look for include vital records such as birth, marriage, and death records, church records, cemetery records, and probate records. In genealogy, original records are almost always preferred to transcriptions. Cemetery records, however, may be an exception, since some published cemetery records were compiled before tombstones became less readable due to weathering and other natural factors. When looking for immigrant records, look for both the incoming or immigration records and any immigration records that might have been generated in your immigrant ancestors' homeland when they left for America. If you know your immigrant ancestors' country of origin, look to see if that country's records include immigration records. Records such as documents granting permission to immigrate, passports, etc., vary greatly in their availability. If you locate an immigration record, it will most likely be written in the native language of that country. In 1820, the U.S. government passed the Steerage Act, which required ship captains to report a list of passengers and demographic information to district collectors. Prior to 1890, individual states processed immigrants into the United States. For example, Castle Garden served as the New York State Immigration Station from 1855 to 1890. The Immigration Act of 1891 excluded those suffering from quote, loathsome or contagious diseases, unquote, and provided for medical examinations. Castle Garden was not set up to handle the large influx of immigrants leading up to the 1900s, so the federal government established Ellis Island, which became the major port of entry in New York from 1892 till it closed in 1954. Other major ports of immigration from the early 1880s to the mid-1900s include Baltimore, Boston, Philadelphia, and New Orleans, plus the ports of Charleston, Galveston, and San Francisco. The Passenger and Immigration List Index, otherwise known as the PHLBIS, is a multi-volume index to publish records that include the names of over 4.5 million immigrants who entered the U.S. and Canadian ports from the 1500s through the 1900s. Many libraries, including the Midwest Genealogy Center, have hard copies of these volumes, and Ancestry also contains this information. Don't forget to check to see if other family members are listed on the same passenger list. Check women's maiden names. In some countries, such as Italy and Germany, women often kept their maiden names after they married. Passenger lists after 1906 generally included the following information: ship information, passenger information such as name and age of the immigrant, birthplace, physical description, and occupation, additional information such as name and address of a relative or friend in that country, and the passenger's final destination in the U.S. Check for added notes. Sometimes notes about citizenship were added, such as a district number or certificate number. Check for bonus pages. And look at the end of the manifest for lists that include births, deaths, marriages, stowaways, or detained aliens. When searching in an online database like Ancestry, view the result or the image and then page through the rest of the images in that document to see if it contains any other relevant family information. Some online resources for passenger lists include Ancestry, Family Search, Ellis Island and Castle Garden, Steve Morris One Step, National Archives and Records Administration. For naturalization records, there was basically a two-step 5-year rule. After 2 years in the U.S., the alien could file first papers or a declaration of intent. After 3 additional years, alien could petition for naturalization. The top image shows a declaration of intent or first papers for actor Yul Brynner. These stages were recorded on census documents as AL for alien, PA for first papers, and NA for naturalized. Prior to 1906 and the creation of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, now called the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, early naturalizations could have been processed in any federal, state, county, or municipal court. U.S. immigration laws changed over time. For example, you are far less likely to find formal naturalization petitions for women and children during the years shown here, when women assumed their husband's citizenship and children took on their father's. The National Archives and Records Administration and the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services are 2 great places to learn more about the laws that were in place during the time your immigrant ancestor came to America and began their journey to becoming a U.S. citizen. Immigrants often traveled together and settled in neighborhoods with others who shared their religion and culture. Immigrants with entry-level skills and those who spoke limited English often settled in older urban communities. As these newcomers fine-tuned their skills, they often moved to other neighborhoods. If you hit a brick wall in your search for your immigrant ancestor, try tracing the paths of known relatives and neighbors. Remember not to overlook the records of heritage societies and fraternal organizations that might provide information on an application or produce newsletters or periodicals with articles of use to your family research. Here are the web addresses not provided on the earlier slides. This list represents only a small portion of the online resources available for researching immigrant ancestors. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us for the Tracing Immigrant Origins. Please take a moment to note the Midwest Genealogy Center contact information and feel free to let us know what we can do to help you and your genealogy research in the future.